The hum of the old clippers was like a lullaby to anyone who stepped inside Mack's Barbershop. The place smelled like talcum powder, faded cologne, and fresh-cut hair, scents that wrapped around you like a worn but comforting blanket. On the wall hung faded portraits of Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, James Baldwin, and Marvin Gaye. The linoleum floor had long lost its shine, but no one seemed to care. People didn't come to Mack's for glamour. They came for truth. At 72, Mack didn't cut hair as fast as he used to. His hands were steadier than people half his age, though, steady because he moved with intent, not speed. His razor glided like it had a mind of its own, always sharp, always respectful. But what made Mack's chair sacred wasn't just the fade or the lineup. It was what he spoke while doing it. Mack was a barber, yes, but he was also a teacher, a philosopher, and, depending on who you asked, a kind of neighborhood priest. He'd never finished college, barely finished high school, but his wisdom was thick with the weight of years, of survival, of watching generations rise and fall in the neighborhood of Eastwood. "You don't sharpen a blade by babying it," he said one morning, shaping a young man's edge. "Same goes for your character. Pressure's what brings your shine." The boy nodded, maybe understanding, maybe not. That didn't matter. Mack had planted the seed. People of all ages came through the door. Kids getting their first haircut sat like wide-eyed statues while their mothers watched from folding chairs. Teenagers came in for the latest cuts, but stayed to hear Mack debate about manhood, respect, and the difference between being liked and being worthy. Old-timers came just to sit, sip coffee, and watch the world pass by through the window that looked out on Jefferson Avenue. Every Friday, without fail, Mack's became more than a barbershop. It became a sermon hall. He would open up Free Game Friday, a ritual where no topic was off limits. Love, money, racism, dreams, fear, responsibility. You could walk in for a taper and leave with a changed heart. Sometimes the kids laughed. Sometimes they argued. But most of the time, they listened. Because even if Mack was tough, he was never cruel. He spoke like someone who had lost things and still chose love. One cloudy afternoon, a boy named Isaiah walked in, thin, twitchy, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big. He didn't speak much at first. Mack noticed the quiet pain in his eyes, like he was trying hard not to fall apart. "First time?" Mack asked, motioning him toward the chair. Isaiah nodded. They didn't talk during the cut, not until Mack finished the lineup and removed the cape. You ain't got to fight the whole world every day. Just fight to stay yourself. That's the bigger win. Isaiah looked at him, really looked. His shoulders dropped an inch. Something softened in his chest. "Thanks," he said, almost a whisper. That night, Mack swept up the hair on the floor like always. Each pile was a story, a life touched, a confidence restored. But across the street, in the shuttered pharmacy, a new sign had gone up. "Coming soon, Jefferson Rise, luxury apartments and retail space." Mack paused, broom midair. He knew what that meant. He'd seen it before in other parts of the city. Coffee shops replaced corner stores, yoga studios replaced laundromats, and barbershops like his, they disappeared, quietly, without protest. But Mack wasn't ready to be erased. Not yet. Not without a fight. Monday mornings were always slow at Mack's. The city still rubbed sleep from its eyes, and even the neighborhood troublemakers were usually too tired to stir up noise. But this Monday felt different. There was a tension in the air, like something had shifted while the block wasn't looking. Mack unlocked the door just before 9. As always, he flipped the faded "open" sign and switched on the old radio that played soul classics like it was still 1975. He brewed a pot of coffee and took his place behind the counter. The shop smelled like cinnamon toast and aftershave, but beneath that was something else: unease. By 10 o'clock, the regulars began to trickle in. Old Man Red with his walker and jokes about the Nixon years. Then came Jalen and Rico, two high schoolers who worked part-time after school and loved arguing about basketball like it was religion. They swept, stocked towels, and practiced fades on a mannequin Mack called Mr. Jones. "Mr. Jones is the only man in here who never complains," Mack joked, running a hand over his bald head. But the mood changed when a woman in a sharp gray suit walked in with a clipboard and a tight smile. "Mr. Mackenzie Williams?" she asked. "That's me, but most folks just call me Mac." She extended her hand. "I'm Dana Whitmore, Development Liaison with Baystone Urban Projects. I'm here to discuss the redevelopment of Jefferson Avenue." Jalen and Rico went quiet. Red froze mid-laugh. Mac gestured toward a chair. "Say your piece." Dana pulled out documents, maps, glossy renderings, promises. "We're revitalizing the district. New businesses, improved infrastructure, increased property value. You're in a key location." Mac narrowed his eyes. "That's a fancy way of saying you want my shop gone." She gave a practiced chuckle. "Not gone, relocated. We're offering relocation assistance to long-standing businesses. There's a beautiful plaza just 10 blocks away. Brand new units, energy efficient." "I've been here 40 years, Mac interrupted. "This place ain't just drywall and clippers. It's history. You see that chair?" He pointed to the first station by the window. "That's where Deshaun got his hair cut before his first job interview. He's a lawyer now. See that picture?" He pointed to a photo taped to the mirror. "Isaiah and Max smiling after his first visit. That boy walked in ready to quit on life. Now he's mentoring kids." Dana tried to remain composed. "I understand your concern, but we're building a future." Mac's voice dropped low. "You build a future by protecting the roots, not ripping them up." After she left, the barbershop buzzed like a hornet's nest. "They can't just bulldoze this place," Rico said. "They won't," Jalen added, "not if we make noise." But Mac remained quiet for a long time. He sat in his old chair, the one that had molded to his body over decades of life, and stared at the ceiling. "They've got papers and permits," he finally said. "We've got stories. Let's hope that still counts for something." That night, Isaiah returned. He had a new haircut and a different energy, like the world had cracked open a bit. "They told me what's happening," he said, his hands in his hoodie pocket. "You saved me, Mac. Let me help you now." Mac smiled faintly. "I don't need saving, son. I need remembering. If they take this place, I want them to know what they're really taking." Isaiah nodded, then pulled out his phone. "I'm going to show them. All of them." The next day, a video went viral on social media. "Barbershop on the brink. Meet the man who cuts more than hair." It featured old photos, neighborhood interviews, stories from clients, and a quiet shot of Mac sweeping his floor as Sam Cooke played in the background. The internet responded like a wildfire. #SaveMax began trending. Journalists started calling. City officials scrabbled for comment. Protesters showed up with signs. Alumni of the barbershop, teachers, firefighters, even a minor celebrity or two came back to say their piece. What had once been just a corner shop was becoming a symbol. But Mac knew the system. Hope was a spark, but change needed fuel. And resistance had a cost. The fight for Mac's barbershop had only just begun. By Wednesday morning, Mac's barbershop wasn't just a local landmark. It was a battleground. Not with fists or fire, but with stories, cameras, and people who had something to lose. The line outside wrapped around the corner. Folks didn't just come for haircuts now. They came to bear witness, to say thank you, to offer backup. Some brought coffee. Others brought signs. Someone even painted a mural of Mac on the side of the building, showing him mid-cut, eyes full of wisdom, hands steady as always. Inside, the barbershop felt alive with heat and movement. "I've never seen this place so full," Jalen whispered as he swept clippings off the floor. Me neither, Mack replied, running a comb through a young boy's curls. But let's not forget why. The viral video had sparked a citywide debate about redevelopment, heritage, and what community really meant. And Mack was at the center of it, whether he liked it or not. Later that afternoon, two men in tailored suits entered the shop. They weren't customers. Their shoes were too clean, their eyes too sharp. "Mr. Williams, City Code Enforcement. We're here to inspect the premises." Mack wiped his hands on a towel. "I've been cutting hair in this spot since before you were born, son. Ain't nothing here that needs inspecting." They didn't smile. "You're required to comply," the second man said. "It's city protocol." Mack didn't flinch. "Then inspect away." They poked and prodded, took photos, scribbled notes. When they left, they handed him a slip of paper. Notice of violation. Faulty wiring, inadequate ventilation, non-compliant signage. $100 here, $200 there, $1,000 altogether. "It's a game," Isaiah growled when he read the notice later. "They're trying to drown you in red tape." Mack folded the paper and slipped it in the drawer. "They think if they press long enough, I'll fold." "And will you?" "No," he said, steady. "I've stood longer than that mirror on the wall." That night, the shop was quieter than usual. Most had gone home. Just Mack, Rico, and an old jazz record humming low. Rico leaned against the counter. "You ever think about walking away?" Mack looked at him. "Sometimes. But I also think about what happens if I do. They don't just erase me. They erase every kid who sat in that chair. Every story told in here when the world outside wasn't listening." Rico swallowed hard. "I never told you this, but my dad used to bring me here, before he got locked up. I remember. He used to hum when I lined up his beard." Rico smiled faintly. "Coming here kept me from messing up. You gave me something solid, even if I didn't know what to call it back then." Mack reached out and rested his hand on Rico's shoulder. "Then make sure the next boy who walks in here gets the same." The next morning, Mack arrived early. The sun hadn't risen yet, but he couldn't sleep. He unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and stood in the middle of the room. Then he saw it. The mural on the side wall had been defaced, black spray paint scrawled over his painted eyes, "Move out or get moved." Mack didn't call the police. He just stood there staring at it, the early light catching the gleam in his eyes. When Rico arrived and saw it, he cursed under his breath. "You okay?" Mack nodded slowly. "It's just paint." But it wasn't. It was a warning. And warnings had consequences. That afternoon, Mack called a meeting. Everyone who cared showed up. Rico, Jalen, Isaiah, Miss Loretta from the diner, Deshaun the lawyer, Pastor Neil, and even local business owners and some high school students who'd never stepped foot inside before. Mack stood behind the counter, hands clasped. "They're not coming for just this building. They're coming for the story we built inside it. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Someone suggested a petition. Another brought up a city council meeting next week. Deshaun promised to file a formal appeal. But it was Miss Loretta who stole the room. "What we need," she said, "is a show, a statement, something they can't ignore." Isaiah grinned. "Like a block party?" "No," she said, "like a community revival. We'll call it Cuts and Culture. Barbers, food, music, spoken word. We'll turn the whole block into a celebration of what this place means." Mack raised an eyebrow. "You think that'll stop them?" She smiled. "I think it'll remind them that this shop ain't just yours anymore. It belongs to all of us." As the meeting ended and plans began, Mack looked around the shop, at the patched walls, the worn chairs, the cracked tile floor. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. And now it was everyone's. The fight wasn't over, but something had shifted. The community wasn't just rallying behind Mack. They were rising with him. The flyer read, "Cuts and Culture, a community revival at Mack's Barbershop, this Saturday, noon till sunset." By Thursday morning, it had been reposted over 1,000 times across the neighborhood's social media circles. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Local musicians volunteered to perform. Food trucks signed up to line the block. Even high school art students offered to repaint the defaced mural. Rico walked into the barbershop with a fresh stack of flyers and a grin. "We might need crowd control." Mack raised an eyebrow but didn't say much. He was sitting in his usual chair, cape over a teenager's shoulders, clippers humming low. Outside, the city buzzed, but inside, time moved to the rhythm of legacy. Saturday came fast. The sun broke through the clouds early that morning, and the air smelled like promise: barbecue smoke, hair grease, and soul. By 11:30 a.m., people were already lining the sidewalks. Folding chairs, lawn chairs, strollers, camera crews. It was a full-on takeover. Someone set up a speaker system on the corner. Isaiah, standing on a makeshift stage made of wooden pallets, did a mic check. He turned to Mack. "You ready?" Mack didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the crowd, old-timers and toddlers, teenagers with blue braids and men in their Sunday suits, mothers holding signs that read "Preserve Our Culture," and little kids holding up paper drawings of barbershop chairs. Then he nodded. "Let's start." The first act was a poetry reading from a young woman named Tamara, who had never set foot in Mack's before, but said she grew up hearing about it from her uncles. "This place," she said, voice shaking but clear, "was where my uncle got his first lineup and his last advice before prison. He said the mirror here showed him more than just his reflection. It showed him his potential." Applause erupted. Then came the music. A jazz trio from the community college, a gospel choir from Pastor Neil's church, a beatbox battle between two teens who had once nearly been expelled for fighting. Food trucks lined the block with catfish, jerk chicken, peach cobbler, and shaved ice. A line of kids stood waiting for face painting, while old heads played dominoes near the barbershop door. And through it all, Mack sat in his chair. He cut hair, he listened, he laughed, he lived. By mid-afternoon, the mural had been fully repainted. Instead of restoring the original, the artists decided to create something bigger. This time, the mural showed not just Mack, but dozens of faces. Rico sweeping the floor, Jalen cracking jokes, Miss Roretta holding a tray of biscuits, Marcus, the ex-con with his trumpet, and even the boy who had filmed the viral video that started it all. In the center was Mack, clippers in one hand, a comb in the other, and a crown of music notes behind his head. It wasn't just art. It was testimony. Near the end of the day, the crowd quieted as Mack was asked to say a few words. He stood on the stage with the microphone in hand, but he didn't speak right away. The wind carried the smell of grilled corn and the sound of children laughing. When he finally did speak, his voice was low but resonant. "They said we were in the way, said progress couldn't happen if we stayed. But this," he motioned to the crowd, "this is progress too." People clapped. "I ain't never tried to be more than what I am, just a man with some clippers and a chair. But over the years, that chair has held broken men, proud men, scared boys, and even future kings." A murmur ran through the crowd. "This ain't just about hair. It's about who we are and who we refuse to stop being." The applause this time was thunderous. As the sun dipped low, people stayed. No one wanted to leave. Mack turned to Rico as they began to clean up. "You think this changes anything?" Rico asked. Mack smiled faintly. "I think it already did." Across the street, someone had hung a new sign on the lamppost. "Gentrify the buildings if you want,
but you can't evict a legacy. Later that night, long after the folding chairs were stacked and the music had faded, Mack sat alone in his barbershop. He looked at the mirror, at his own reflection under flickering fluorescent light. Then he looked at the chair in the center of the room, the one that had held generations of black stories. He whispered, "Still standing." And the silence around him didn't feel empty. It felt earned.
Monday morning brought back the ordinary. The music was gone, the streamers and signs had been cleaned up, but something lingered, a hum beneath the surface. People who'd passed by the barbershop for years without looking twice now nodded as they walked past. Some even stopped in to shake Mack's hand. The festival had done more than bring people together. It had carved Mack's barbershop into the collective soul of the neighborhood. But celebrations don't pay bills, and smiles don't stop bulldozers. That afternoon, a letter arrived. It was tucked under the door in a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just 2 words handwritten on the front. Final notice. Inside, Mack unfolded the typed letter with steady hands. Rico stood nearby, sweeping hair into little gray piles that felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. Mack read it once, then twice. Rico paused. "What is it?" Mack handed him the letter. It was short, clinical. The redevelopment board had moved up the demolition schedule. They would be conducting final inspections next week. If Mack couldn't present the valid commercial lease or relocation plan by Friday, the building would be cleared, by force if necessary. "This some kind of threat?" Rico asked. "It's the cost," Mack said quietly, "of holding your ground." Word spread fast. Jalen came in before sundown, fists clenched. "They can't do this, not after Saturday." Pastor Neil showed up later with a man in a bow tie and horn-rimmed glasses. "This is Attorney Davis. He's with the Community Heritage Legal Fund." The lawyer looked over the papers, lips pressed tight. "You're technically month to month, Mr. Mack, but there might be a case for eminent domain abuse, especially if we prove cultural significance." "You mean a lawsuit?" Mack asked. The lawyer nodded. "It could stall them, maybe even stop the demolition altogether. But it's risky, and the board has money. We don't." Mack sighed. "I've been cutting hair longer than you've been alive. I've survived crime waves, crooked cops, and a damn near pandemic. Now they coming at me with paper?" That night, Mack sat on the stoop of the barbershop long after the others left. The block was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a decision waiting to be made. He looked across the street at the mural, its colors glowing under a flickering street lamp. His father's voice echoed in his mind, words from a time when Mack was just a boy sweeping floors. "Sometimes you pay rent, sometimes you pay with fight. Either way, staying somewhere always costs you something." Mack muttered. "I paid every kind of way, Pop, and they still want more." The next morning, he called a meeting. They gathered in the shop. Rico, Jalen, Pastor Neil, Tamara, even Ms. Loretta. The shop felt full, not just with people, but with purpose. "I got a decision to make," Mack began. "They given me 4 days to give up or lawyer up." Tamara stood. "What do you want to do?" Mack didn't answer immediately. He looked around at the chairs, at the mirrors, at the pictures on the wall, photos of generations with fresh fades, first cuts, and smiles wide as the horizon. "I want to stay," he said simply. "But I won't let y'all suffer for it." Ms. Loretta folded her arms. "We stayed when they redlined. We stayed when the bank said no loans. We stayed when they closed the school down the block. You'd think a few white papers and bulldozers scare us now?" Pastor Neil added. "We don't just stand behind you, Mack. We stand with you." By noon, a petition had been launched. By 3 p.m., it had over 5,000 signatures. The neighborhood rallied again, but this time, it wasn't just a block party. It was a movement. Flyers with the words, "This chair stays," appeared on windows, storefronts, and car bumpers.
Local teachers held a teach-in on cultural preservation. A photographer began documenting every customer who came in that week, printing their photos on a wall now dubbed the lineup of legacy. Mack didn't say much during those days. He just kept cutting hair. Every line he shaped, every fade he blended, it all felt heavier, like each haircut was a silent declaration. I'm still here. I still matter. This place still lives. Thursday night, he received another envelope. This one wasn't left under the door. A man in a tailored suit delivered it in person. Mr. Mackenzie, we're still hoping you'll consider a private settlement. The city's offer is quite generous. Mack opened the envelope. 6 figures. He didn't blink. You trying to buy my story. Problem is, you can't afford it. The man hesitated. There's no guarantee your claim will succeed. Litigation is lengthy, stressful. Mack stood. So is survival. He handed the envelope back, unopened. Later, as he locked up the shop, Rico asked him quietly, "So what now?" Mack looked across the street at the mural, at the faces glowing in the night. "Now," he said, "we make 'em hear us. With clippers, with culture, and if we have to, with court."
It was the kind of Friday morning that felt like the beginning of something. Gray skies hung overhead, heavy with indecision. Mack adjusted his tie in the cracked mirror of the shop's back room. He hadn't worn a suit since his wife's funeral. The fabric felt tight at the shoulders, but loose at the heart. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Not a protest, yet. Just people showing up, some holding signs, others holding phones. Ms. Loretta brought coffee and a prayer. Rico paced like a lion in a cage. "Never thought I'd need to testify to cut hair," Mack muttered. Jalen grinned. "Never thought a barbershop would go to trial." The courtroom smelled like paper and nerves. Mack sat beside Attorney Davis, who looked both tired and laser-focused. The developers sat across the aisle. Slick suits, crossed arms, not a speck of neighborhood dust on their polished shoes. The judge, an older black woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, tapped her gavel. "Let's begin." Davis opened with photographs. Children getting their first cut, elderly men reminiscing in chairs older than the courthouse itself, flyers from the cultural festival, community events that had used the barbershop as home base. "This is not simply a business," he said. "It is a cornerstone, a safe haven, a cultural artifact that breathes." The city attorney countered with zoning maps, redevelopment plans, language like urban renewal and economic potential. But every word sounded sterile, like concrete poured over memories. Mack took the stand. He spoke plain. "This ain't just clippers and mirrors. This chair has seen joy and heartbreak, graduations and job interviews. People sat in this shop when Dr. King died, when Barack won, when folks lost their mamas or found out their sons made varsity." The courtroom was silent. "I've cut 3 generations of heads. That ain't economics, as legacy." Then came the witnesses. Tamara, with tears in her voice, told the story of how the shop was the only place her brother ever felt safe after school. Jalen spoke about how Mack mentored him when no one else would, giving him confidence one edge up at a time. Even Ms. Loretta took the stand. Her words came soft but steady. "They say they build in the future, but if the future don't remember the past, what good is it?" The judge recessed the court for deliberation. Mack returned to the barbershop, still in his suit. Customers trickled in, curious, hopeful, anxious. He didn't speak much, just kept cutting. Each snip of the scissors felt defiant. Each hum of the clippers was a protest song. Then, near closing, a teenager walked in, shy, hoodie pulled low. "I saw the video online about the shop. I never had a real cut before. Could I—" Mack pointed to the chair. "You came to the right place."
He trimmed carefully, watching the boy's eyes flicker up in the mirror. By the end, the kid sat straighter, smiled wider. "That's on the house," Max said, waving him off. The boy hesitated, then turned back. "Mister, I think you're winning, even if they don't say it." That night, Max sat alone in the shop. He thought of his father, of the fights he never got to finish, of the times he told Mac, "Don't let them erase you while you're still breathing." A knock came at the door. It was Attorney Davis. He looked exhausted, but smiling. "She ruled in our favor." Mac blinked. "Come again?" The judge cited historical value, cultural significance, and public testimony. The barbershop stays. Mac didn't cheer. He just exhaled. A long, slow, history-weighted breath. Then he turned, flipped the sign from closed to open. "Rico!" "Yeah?" "Let's cut!"
The win in court didn't bring fireworks or headlines, but in the neighborhood, it echoed like a drumline. Folks walked by the barbershop and nodded like they were saluting a monument. Some left notes in the mail slot. Others just stood across the street for a while, like paying silent respects to something sacred that had almost slipped away. Inside, Mac kept it moving. He oiled clippers, he swept hair, he trimmed and lined and faded, like nothing had changed, but everything had. The chair had become a throne, the walls archives, every mirror a witness. One morning, Jalen brought in a box. "What's that?" Mac asked. "History," Jalen said. "Found it in my grandma's garage. Thought you'd want it here." Inside, old photos, newspaper clippings, yellowed Polaroids from the early days of the shop. Mac's father leaning against the doorframe in his white apron, laughing with customers. Flyers from long-gone events like Soul Sundays, free cuts for grads, Voter Registration Day, hosted by Mac's Barbershop. Mac stared at a picture of himself at 19, holding clippers like they were a torch. "Why'd you keep all this?" he asked. Jalen shrugged. "Felt important, like we were building a museum without walls." Word got around. People began bringing in their own pieces of history. A kid's first haircut photo, a birthday flyer from 2006, a love letter scribbled on the back of a receipt from when two teens had met waiting for a cut. Soon, the barbershop looked like a living scrapbook. One corner held a collage of baby photos, another a faded American flag folded beside a barber's cape that once belonged to a man who served in Vietnam and cut hair until he died. Even the combs, the aprons, the chairs, they began to feel like artifacts. Miss Loretta came in one day with a covered frame. "You should hang this." Mac unveiled it slowly. It was a painting, handmade, of the shop in all its glory, colors warm, brushstrokes alive. In the corner, scrawled like a signature, "The museum they never built." Max stared. "I don't deserve this." "You don't get to decide that," she said. Local kids started showing up not just for cuts, but for stories. They'd point at a photo on the wall and ask, "Who's that?" Or, "Is this real?" Max started answering them like a docent at an exhibit. "That's Terrence. He cut hair and started a youth basketball league in '92. Kept 20 boys out of gangs that summer. That man there, Preacher Evans. Baptized 4 generations. Got his beard trimmed every Saturday, like clockwork. See that chair? Sat my daddy in that one after he beat cancer. He cried and laughed all in the same breath." One Friday, a group of high school seniors came in, led by their civics teacher. She said, "We're studying Black history. Thought we'd come to where it lives." Matt gave them a tour, told stories, answered questions. When they left, the teacher whispered, "This is more powerful than any textbook." That night, Max sat alone again, but not lonely. He looked around at the walls, the floor, the air. This wasn't just a shop. It was proof. Proof that ordinary people doing ordinary things in one ordinary place could make something extraordinary, if only someone was willing to see it. In the back, Jalen worked quietly on a plaque. It read, "Mack's Barbershop, established in 1974. A people's history trimmed to perfection." And outside, people kept coming. Not for a cut always, but for a memory, for a story, for a piece of the museum they never built,
because someone already had.
The morning sun filtered through the blinds in narrow golden slits, cutting across Mack's face as he flipped the sign to open. The bell above the door chimed like a starting note in a slow symphony. But this day felt different, not heavy with fear like before the lawsuit, not celebratory like after the win, but full of questions. New questions. The shop had survived. Now what? That afternoon, a woman stepped in. She looked out of place, hair in a neat bun, suit crisp, glasses sliding down her nose. She had the air of someone who knew how to talk fast and bill by the hour. "You Mack?" she asked. "Depends on who's asking." "I'm Dana Charles, Community Development Consultant. I work with nonprofits and local governments. I read about the case. I saw what you built here." She paused and smiled. "Would you ever consider turning this into more than a barbershop?" Mack raised an eyebrow. "More? What's more than this?" She didn't flinch. "What if this became a foundation, a youth center, a legacy project, something that spreads what you do to other neighborhoods?" He didn't answer right away. The idea wasn't new. People had whispered versions of it for years, but now it felt possible, maybe even necessary. Later that evening, Jalen walked in with his laptop. "Been working on something, a proposal. We start small, Saturday workshops, financial literacy, college prep, health screenings. You teach life stuff, I'll run logistics. We'll call it Chairs Open Doors." Mack laughed out loud. "That name's terrible," he said. "But it's true, though," Jalen replied. "This chair saved my life." The following weekend, the first Chairs Open Doors event drew a dozen teens and 5 nervous parents. Mack gave a talk called How to Cut Hair and Cut Excuses. His voice cracked halfway through, but nobody cared. They hung on every word. Miss Loretta brought lunch. Jalen walked everyone through a vision board activity. And in the back, Dana Charles quietly took notes, occasionally wiping her eyes behind those glasses. The program caught fire. Local media picked it up. Donations trickled in. An university professor offered to teach a mentorship module. An ex-inmate came to share his story and ended up staying as a volunteer. One by one, doors opened. And not just the figurative kind. By fall, Mack bought the adjacent storefront. It was dusty, with cracked tile and broken glass, but to him it looked like potential. Jalen dubbed it The Wing, a place for overflow workshops, tutoring, art classes. A second chair was installed, not for cutting, but for conversation. Any kid could sit in it and talk to someone who listened. That was the only rule. One evening, a quiet boy named Emery came in. 12 years old, said almost nothing. Mack gave him a fresh cut, then sat him in the Wing's chair. "You don't have to say anything, but I'll tell you something instead." He talked about clipped wings, about how some birds don't even know they're meant to fly until someone opens the cage. When Mack finished, Emery finally spoke. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "You better." In the months that followed, Mack's chair became 2 chairs, then 4. The shop remained a shop, but also became a school, a sanctuary, a family. And every time a kid walked out with their head high, a new door swung open somewhere in the world. Sometimes the door was a college campus. Sometimes it was a stage. Sometimes it was just the door to a better version of themselves. At the year's end, a mural was painted across the side of the building. It showed a boy sitting in a barber chair, his haircut half finished, but behind him, wide open wings stretched into the clouds. Above it were the words, "A haircut doesn't change the world, but the hands that give it just might."
Winter settled over the neighborhood like an old quilt, familiar, heavy, patched with memory. Snow curled on windowsills, and the breath of passersby floated like smoke in the air. Inside Mack's barbershop, warmth radiated, not just from the aging radiator in the corner, but from the rhythm of voices, clippers, and the low hum of jazz on vinyl. Mack adjusted the cape around a young boy's shoulders, brushing off tiny curls of hair. The boy, Malik, fidgeted, his eyes darting to the mural outside through the frosted window. "You think I could ever be up there?" Malik asked suddenly. Mack leaned in with the gentleness of a father. You already are. That mural ain't just paint. It's a mirror for every one of y'all. The mural had become a landmark. People stopped to take pictures. Tourists asked questions. And once a city council member came by and simply stared for a long time before walking inside. I didn't come for a haircut, but I think I just found something I didn't know I lost. But the shop was more than a symbol now. It had structure. Chair's open doors had a board of directors. Half of them former students. One of them a retired judge. Grants started arriving. A grant from the National Endowment for the Arts paid for a storytelling project. Another helped turn the wing into a recording space where teens could document their lives in their own voices. Each story was added to a digital archive titled Legacy Lines. The tagline? Because history doesn't just happen in books. Sometimes it gets a fresh fade first. Jalen, now managing director of the initiative, watched the numbers grow. We've had 87 kids come through the program, Mac, he said, scrolling through a spreadsheet. You've written more legacy with your clippers than most folks do with a pen. Mac grunted, always allergic to praise. Ain't about numbers, Jalen. It's about moments. That 1 second when a kid looks in the mirror and sees possibility. One night, Ruthie, now 17, tall and fearless, came in with a camera crew. Documentary project, she said. School assignment. But I want to make it real. For you. Mac wasn't used to being in front of a camera, but he obliged. She asked questions, some hard, about his past, about the days when he almost gave up, about the moment he decided to stay when he could have left. Ruthie turned off the camera after the last question, but kept looking at him. You know you saved me, right? Mac chuckled. Nah, I just gave you a safe place to be smart. No. You gave me a future I couldn't imagine on my own. Weeks later, her short documentary titled Legacy in Every Line won a statewide award. It aired at a student film festival, and when they called her to the stage, she said 5 words. I share this with Mac. At the shop, Mac hung the certificate on the wall next to the first newspaper clipping about the lawsuit. Below it, a framed cape with a stitched name. Mac. Someday, Jalen said, that cape's going to hang in a museum. Mac smiled. Let it hang here first, where it belongs. One snowy afternoon, Emery, the quiet boy who barely spoke when he first came, walked in with a sketch pad. He said, I made something, holding out the drawing. It was the shop, perfectly detailed, and in the center, a barber chair with roots growing from its base, digging deep into the earth. Mac stared at it for a long time. You drew it better than I ever saw it, he whispered. Before locking up that night, Mac sat alone in the chair, the one he'd stood behind for decades. His hands rested on his knees. His eyes drifted to the reflection in the mirror, and he saw not just himself, but everyone who had ever sat in that chair. Boys who became mentors, girls who became scholars, teens who had once feared the world and now helped shape it. The legacy was in every line of their lives. And it had started with just one.
The day started like any other. The bell chimed softly as the first customer of the morning stepped into the shop, brushing snow from his jacket. Mac greeted him with a nod, the clippers already humming like a heartbeat in his hand. Outside, the neighborhood seemed paused under winter's hush, the sky heavy with more snow to come. But the ordinary had a way of hiding the extraordinary. That afternoon, a young man walked in, mid-20s, tall, eyes tired but determined. He looked around as if searching for something more than a haircut. Got time for a walk-in? He asked. Always, Mac replied, motioning him to the chair. As the cape settled over the young man's shoulders, Mac asked, Name? Jordan. They spoke little at first. Jordan stared into the mirror silent while Mac's hands moved with steady grace. Midway through the cut, Mac noticed the edge of a tattoo peeking out from under Jordan's sleeve, a faded design that looked military. "You serve?" Mack asked gently. Jordan nodded. "Army. 3 tours, came back different." The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken. As Mack lined up the edges, he said, "You looking for work?" Jordan hesitated. "Been trying. Nothing sticks. I don't know who I am outside the uniform." Mack turned off the clippers and looked Jordan in the eye through the mirror. "You're a man who walked in here asking for a cut. That tells me you still believe in fresh starts." When the haircut was done, Jordan stared at himself longer than most did. He rubbed his jaw, sat taller. This helps," he said. Mack handed him a card. "There's a program next door for vets. We partner with them sometimes. But if nothing else, you come back here, sit, talk, or sweep the floor. Ain't about the job. It's about being seen." Jordan shook his hand. "This place feels like home." He wasn't the only one. That day, 3 more walk-ins came. One was a mother with 2 sons, the other a boy who'd just been suspended from school. Word had spread. Again, not because of marketing, but because the shop never changed its song. It kept playing truth, one line at a time. That night, the neighborhood was hit with rolling blackouts. The shop went dark mid-cut. Phones lost signal. The cold crept in. Mack lit candles and turned on a battery-powered radio. Clients stayed. No one rushed out. People talked, shared stories, laughed in the candlelight. Jalen brought in hot cocoa from the cafe. Malik, now in community college, sat a little boy on a booster seat and finished his fade with a flashlight in his teeth. It wasn't just a blackout. It was a spark. Someone took a photo. Candlelight glowing off mirrors, hair on the floor, smiles in the dark. By morning, the picture had gone viral. Caption: "When the lights went out, the legacy stayed on." News crews came. Reporters asked questions. They wanted to know what made this place different. Mack stood outside, arms folded, unimpressed. He said, "It's just a barbershop. Only thing we cut is doubt." But the picture did more than bring attention. It brought an idea. A few weeks later, Jordan returned, not for a cut, but with a proposal. He said, "I want to help turn this place into a community resiliency hub. For emergencies, for connection, for people who don't know where else to go." He handed Mack a folder. Plans, grants, letters of intent. Mack opened his mouth, closed it. Then smiled. "You sure you just came in for a cut?" Jordan laughed. It changed everything. The shop expanded, quietly, purposefully. Solar panels were added to the roof, a generator in the back, a partnership with a tech nonprofit to offer free Wi-Fi and charging stations. What had started as a haircut during a snowstorm became the blueprint for how a neighborhood could care for its own. Late one evening, Mack sat by the window. Snow fell slow outside. He turned the clippers off. Let the silence hum. He looked around at the chairs, the mirrors, the mural glowing under a street lamp. So much had changed. But the heart had not. And all of it, every beat, every turn, every legacy, had begun with one moment. One cut. The cut that changed everything.
It wasn't the newest chair in the shop, not by a long shot. Its leather was cracked along the seams, its chrome dulled by decades of touch. The hydraulic lever creaked like a tired joint. But no one dared replace it. They called it Chair 1. Mack called it Old Memory. Everyone who'd ever mattered to the shop have sat in that chair.
It had held boys getting their first lineup and old men getting their last shave. It had borne fathers and sons, activists and addicts, men fresh from prison and women with shaved heads in protest. It had heard confessions, laughter, regret, and songs hummed under breath. But more than that, it had listened. One slow Tuesday, Mack found himself alone in the shop, save for chair 1. The other chairs had been reupholstered, the floor was swept, but something pulled him toward the old seat. He ran a rag across its armrest. "You remember, don't you?" he murmured. He sat down, and the memories came flooding back. He remembered Mr. Otis, the math teacher who came in every Saturday at noon sharp, quoting Marcus Garvey while Max shaped his beard. He used to bring in newspapers for the kids. When the shop was short on funds, Mr. Otis donated anonymously. Mac only found out after the man's funeral. He remembered little Reggie, a quiet boy with a stutter, who found his voice reciting rap lyrics while getting a fade. Reggie was now in Atlanta, teaching spoken word to high schoolers, still sent postcards. He remembered Ava, the girl who dared to ask for a taper. They'd called her Tomboy then. She now coached the local girls' basketball team and still came in for a cut and life talk twice a month. Mac leaned his elbows on the chair's arms. "You say wood holds memory," he whispered, "but leather remembers pain." He looked at the indentation in the seat, worn from decades of lives leaning in. A groove of presence. He stood, went to the back, and returned with a camera. The next morning, a photo of Chair 1 appeared on the shop's front window. Below it, "This chair has held our stories. Now it holds our future." People began stopping to stare. Some took selfies with it. Others brought their kids to sit in it for legacy cuts. Word spread. Social media dubbed it the story chair. Soon, something beautiful began happening. People started writing letters to the chair. Handwritten notes. Folded paper, some anonymous, some signed. They tucked them beneath the armrests, taped them under the cushion, or slipped them behind the mirror above. Some letters were long, others just a sentence. "You helped me not give up on myself. I found out I was pregnant here. You were the only place I felt safe." Mac began collecting the notes in a binder titled Testaments of the Cut. One afternoon, Jordan walked in and saw a line of kids waiting, not for haircuts, but to sit in the chair and read from the binder. Jalen, the young barber, now mentoring others, stood nearby with his phone, filming for a documentary project. "This isn't just a chair anymore," he said to Jordan. "It's an archive." Jordan smiled. "A living one." The city's cultural council got wind of it. They called, visited, took photos, and one day they made it official. Chair 1 was being inducted into the City Archive of Living History. But Mac refused to have it removed or encased. "You don't preserve a living thing by locking it away," he told them. "You let it breathe. You let it remember more." So the shop added a small plaque to its base. "This chair remembers. Sit with respect." One night, long after closing, Mac sat in chair 1 again. Lights low, clippers off. He held a letter in his hand. No name on it, just 2 sentences. "You saved my brother when I couldn't. I hope one day I can be someone's chair too." Mac exhaled, slow and deep. He didn't need to know who wrote it. He just needed the chair to keep holding on.
The sun rose like a spotlight through the shop window, slanting gold across the floorboards and glinting off the mirrors. It was the day of the town hall meeting, the final vote on the development plan, and the shop buzzed with a strange mix of nerves and celebration. Jordan stood by the door, straightening his tie for the 4th time. "You look fine," said Mack from behind a client. "You worried about your speech?" Jordan nodded. "I've got 10 minutes to convince the city council not to sell us out to luxury condos. And I'm not even on the council." "Good," Mack said. "They don't need another politician. They need someone who's bled on this block." The shop was packed before noon, not for cuts necessarily, but for presents. Old heads came by just to slap shoulders and drink coffee. Mothers stopped in with sons who barely needed a trim, just to be part of the day. Jalen brought in his camera crew, a local jazz trio set up in the corner by the candy machine. Ruthie, the neighborhood baker, dropped off 3 trays of sweet potato pie and a note, for courage. Max stood by chair 1, nodding at each arrival. His hands weren't cutting today. They were receiving, clasping, holding, blessing. "You ever think we'd come this far?" asked Tyrone, one of the retired barbers from back in the day. Max smiled. "I thought we'd last, but I didn't think we'd matter this much." Jordan's speech was printed, folded, and tucked in his back pocket. But every time he tried to rehearse it, his hands shook. So he walked over to chair 1, sat down, and stared into the mirror. Behind him, the shop's reflection came to life. Faces, movement, history. Jalen stepped over and quietly asked, "Mind if I record this?" Jordan gave a small nod. And then, without unfolding a speech, he spoke. "My name's Jordan Ellis. I grew up 4 blocks from here. I got my first haircut in this chair. I got my first job sweeping these floors. I watched my father cry in this mirror after losing his job. I saw a kid learn to read right over there by the candy rack. This isn't just a barbershop. It's a school, a clinic, a therapist's couch. It's where our community stitched itself back together when the world tried to tear us apart. If you build your condos here, you're not redeveloping. You're erasing. But if you let us stay, we'll keep raising kings in this chair. We'll keep shaping lives with razors and truth. We'll keep fading hair and growing futures. Don't vote on paper. Vote from the soul." When he finished, the shop stood still. Then Ruthie, never shy, burst into a round of applause. Others followed. Some wept. And Jalen whispered, "That wasn't a speech. That was scripture." That night, the town hall meeting was packed. The line snaked around the block. News cameras arrived. Community leaders showed up in bow ties and sneakers. Mack wore his best suspenders. Chair 1 stayed behind, but its story came with them. Jordan walked to the microphone. This time, he didn't tremble. Behind him, they all stood. Jalen, Tyrone, Ruthie, Mrs. Otis's grandson, little Reggie, now all grown, Ava, even Councilwoman Esteban, who used to get her nephews cut for free on Tuesdays. The council looked out at the crowd and down at the proposal. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. The barbershop stayed. The community celebrated late into the night. There was music in the streets. Mack opened the shop and let anyone who wanted to sit in chair 1 sit in. Photos were taken, stories shared. And through it all, Jordan sat quietly in the corner, holding his folded speech. Never used, never needed. Beside him, Mack offered a nod. "You were the cut. We were just the clippers."
6 months after the council's vote, the block looked the same, but the energy was electric. The barbershop's old sign had been restored with fresh paint. A mural stretched along the neighboring wall, painted by Ava and a crew of neighborhood kids. It showed a row of chairs, not just barbershop seats, but church pews, school desks, and park benches, all places where Black wisdom was passed down. Inside, the scent of aftershave mingled with sweet potato pie. It was the shop's 50th anniversary. A camera crew from PBS was setting up by the window. Jalen was directing volunteers. Ruthie brought cupcakes. And in the center of it all sat Mack in chair 1, looking quietly at everything he'd helped build. "Did you ever imagine this?" Jordan asked him. "Imagine it?" Mack smiled. "I cut it into the heads of boys for decades. Now it's walking around on legs." The day's guests included barbers from 5 different states, each one mentored by someone Mack had once trained. Former clients returned as doctors, teachers, fathers. They sat for one more cut, not because they needed it, but because it meant something.
During the evening program, Jordan stood at the front. "This shop taught me to listen," he said, "to people, to silence, to pain, to laughter." He reached under the counter and pulled out Mack's first set of clippers, polished, still functional. "I think it's time we make this official," he said. "Mr. Mack Wilson, this chair belongs to you forever. But we'd be honored if you'd let us call you what you've always been to us, the Professor." The shop burst into applause. Mack wiped his eyes. "If I'm the professor, y'all better keep coming to class." The final cut of the night was given to little Reggie, now 17, heading to college on a scholarship. As Mack lined his hair, he whispered, "Every line I cut is a map, you just follow it home." Outside, the neighborhood lit up with celebration. Children danced, elders sat on stoops. Music pulsed from the shop speakers, classics and new cuts alike. Jordan looked out the window and exhaled. 50 years, and we're just getting started. Chair 1 sat ready, the clippers buzzed on, and the story of a barbershop that saved a neighborhood kept cutting forward one lineup at a time.